This is the Minute Takers training for the Presbytery of Tampa Bay. And what we're trying to accomplish with this training is mostly to equip folks who are taking minutes for committees and commissions and just in general for whatever they're doing to have some specific guidelines as to what they should actually include in their minutes. So we're actually going to look at a lot of our different committees and commissions and the different items that need to be in those minutes. We're also going to look at just minutes in general and how to do good minutes by Robert's Rules of Order. So we're going to actually start with kind of the general principles of what good minutes should look like and really what minutes are, because I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about the purpose of minutes and why we take them. A lot of folks seem to get that confused when they're first starting out. So what minutes are primarily is they are official records. There are two things. One, they're official records, and that means that for Presbytery staff, if we don't have a record of it in the minutes, then as far as we're concerned, it didn't happen. Like we weren't there, we don't know. It's really hard for us to do something, to take action, unless it's in the minutes. So, for instance, myself, I can't take action on, say, distributing funds, dispersing funds. Joe Nixon, if you come to Joe, who's our bookkeeper, with a request to disperse some kind of scholarship fund that your committee just made a decision on, without minutes, he can't do it. Because it doesn't, if there's no official record of it, then we don't know. Or for myself, if I'm going to be changing the status of a minister based on something the COM did, I can't really do that until I have the minutes of the committee meeting, or in our case, the commission meeting. So they're number one, official records. Number two, minutes are historical records. So there's something that we're taking with an eye towards the folks who come after us. So that means that when we're taking minutes, we need to keep in mind that it's really important for future committee members, for instance, the next chair of the committee, or just the members of the committee going forward, to know what happened in the past. That's particularly the case when we have, for instance, a minister who is put on the inactive roll or is temporarily taken out of ministry. We need to have some kind of record of that, and if there were any stipulations or conditions placed on it, or if there were policy set in place or money set aside or that sort of thing, it's really important to have that for folks who are coming after us. Also, it's actually historical. It's something that the folks at the Presbyterian Historical Society are going to be interested in someday. They will look through, and they're currently looking through, all kinds of records from presbyteries and churches from decades ago, even centuries ago, trying to learn more and more about what was going on in the culture at the time and what the church's responses were and things like that. So I'm sure in the future a lot of research is going to be done by some sort of artificial intelligence or Google or something like that, but for right now, it's still definitely important for us to make sure that we're keeping good records for the Historical Society. So as someone who's taking minutes, you're responsible to make sure that those are done correctly and that they are properly preserved. So make sure that they get into the stated clerk's hands, in other words. And this kind of leads into the presbytery responsibilities. There are two things that you've got to do if you're taking minutes for a presbytery committee that are listed in our bylaws. Number one, you have to turn your committee or commission minutes over to the stated clerk within 2 weeks of them being recorded. Now that means the draft minutes would be nice to have, but what I really need and what I really want are the official minutes that you are going to approve at the meeting after, usually the meeting after the meeting where the minutes were taken. So those are the official minutes, and that's what I really need. to have from all of our committees and commissions so that I can preserve them and get them eventually to the Historical Society or get them to whoever comes next. And that's in our bylaws. It's a requirement of our particular presbytery. Something that is also a requirement, and this is actually coming from the Book of Order more so than our bylaws, is that you, if you're a commission, have to have a report to the presbytery of your actions. Now, the reason for that is because a commission is acting on the presbytery's behalf. It's using the presbytery's authority, and therefore the presbytery is entitled to know what you did in their name. So if you did something, that is, your commission did something, with the authority delegated to it by the presbytery, you are required to put a report together. And that's something that we do. Of course, every presbytery meeting, all the committees and commissions turn in their reports, and that becomes part of the presbytery packet. So those are the two big responsibilities. Get your minutes to the stated clerk, and at the 10 days before the presbytery meeting, you've got to get a report to the stated clerk in order to get that out in time to the presbytery. So that's kind of the overview as far as how to write good minutes. And by the way, if you have a question at any time, please feel free to stop me, and we'll just go ahead and talk about your question. I'm trying to go through this quickly because I ran out of time when I presented this material live. So if I'm going too fast, just stop me, slow me down, and we'll focus on something. But how to actually write good minutes. Now, Robert's Rules guidelines are a little different than what would come naturally. What we would naturally think of when we're writing minutes. Now, Robert's Rules has a certain philosophy for writing minutes, and that would primarily be that we're focused on recording actions. Now, when someone is new at writing minutes, and this was certainly the case for myself when I was writing minutes for a committee or commission, I would want to just write everything down. I would want to record the discussion and record, what was happening, so that there was a complete record, and so that everyone could figure out everything that happened or that was discussed at that meeting. But it turns out those are not actually good minutes. Because sometimes that discussion, it doesn't really lead to anything, and it's not really necessary to have. What is necessary to have are the actions. So we've got to record the actions that the committee takes, and don't just copy down everything that everybody says like you're a court reporter or something like that. That's not what we're doing with Robert's minutes. What we're doing is just trying to focus on what the committee actually did. And that also means that we don't editorialize. It's considered very poor form to, for instance, say, well, the committee very unwisely chose to ignore their clerk's advice and move forward with this particular action. So we tend to want to put our 2 cents in sometimes, and that's generally speaking unwise, and it's also against Robert's Rules. We don't want to do that. We just want to record the essential details and the essential actions that are taking place. So with recording of motions, that principle is also applied in that you only record the final wording of a main motion. And I realize that not all, but most presbytery committees are probably not going to follow Robert's Rules so strictly. Probably they're not going to even worry about a motion until all of the discussion is done and all of the details have been ironed out, which is the exact inverse and reverse of what Robert says you ought to do, which is come up with a motion and then refine it and edit it and amend it and delete some stuff and then vote on it or replace it or something like that. So if you go through that process, then don't worry about anything except the final wording of the motion. Whatever action it is that you finally end up taking, that's what you record. And, of course, you also would record what happened to it to get it tabled, or did it pass? Was it seconded? That kind of thing. Um, and you would also want to record even failed points of order or appeals. So a failed main motion you might not record, but a failed point of order or appeal, in other words, someone disagreeing with what the moderator or the chair says, you would record in the minutes just to kind of have there as a record in case there's a remedial case later or something like that, which would almost never be the case in a Presbytery committee, but you never know. That's Roberts. Also, another thing that used to vex me is recording the seconder of a motion. Roberts actually doesn't say that you need to do that. Now, I had learned to do that, I guess, just because I didn't study Roberts until I became a stated clerk, and I had seen other people kind of frantically trying to scribble down who was it that seconded that. And as you all know, usually 10 people second a motion. Someone says, I move it, and then 4 people at the same time say second. You don't need to worry about who seconded it. A lot of the time you don't need to worry about who moved it, but if someone did move a motion, you are supposed to write that down. But if it's coming from a committee or something like that, it's a little different. So other items that you want to include in the minutes, and we'll go through some sample minutes as well. You'll get this PowerPoint afterwards, so don't worry about taking super great minutes of this or notes of this particular meeting. But the location of the meeting, wherever that happens to be, it's usually the church and the city. The date and time of the meeting. The type of meeting, is it a stated meeting or a special or called meeting? The name of the person moderating the meeting. The name of the clerk, which is probably you. The time that you begin and the time that you adjourn. The number of votes for and against something, only if you are voting by ballot. Of course, if it's just yays and nays, you don't necessarily, that I guess you would record as well. One other note here is that you don't record abstentions. In Roberts, there's no such thing as an abstention. So there's only votes for and votes against. Now, of course, if somebody insists that their name go into the minutes, like, let the minutes reflect that I, David Baker, have abstained from this particular vote, or something like that, then, to avoid an argument, you might include that in the minutes. But strictly speaking, by Robert's rules, you don't record abstentions, you don't record, non-votes, you just record the for and against. And if you're counting, if there's a division, if you're actually counting, you record that. If it's just voice vote or something like that, you just record the result. Whatever the chair said, the ayes have it or the negatives have it. You also are going to want to have in your minutes a declaration of quorum. Now, generally, that is the job of the clerk. It might end up being done by the moderator. It usually is supposed to be done by the clerk, but that's so long as it's done and it's recorded. That's something that you want in Robert's rules, because you want to just know that that's one of the factors of having a decent and an order meeting, is that enough people were there to make the decisions. Now, kind of what that means as well is that you need to know what the quorum for your particular committee or commission is, and we'll cover that information later when we go through each of the individual committees and commissions. Another thing that you want to include that's very important and sort of related to quorum is the attendance. You are going to want to record all the people who are there and all the people who are not. So if someone has an excused absence, you would note excused, or if they're just not there and no one knows where they are, you'd say absent, and you'd also include guests. And a lot of the times that's going to be people like myself, who are not technically a part of the committee, but are there in a staff role, or who are there just to give information or training, something along those lines, to the committee or commission. You're also...
I have a question on that.
Sure.
When a guest is only there for part of the meeting, do you indicate what part they are there for, or they're not there for?
I don't think so. That is not something I remember reading about in Roberts. So I would say as far as Roberts is concerned, they're either there or they're not. And since they don't count towards quorum, it doesn't really matter. So
Okay.
you're probably good to go just saying that they were there. And typically, Roberts is not very interested in guests. You wouldn't even, for instance, and we'll get to this on the next slide, but you wouldn't even want to do anything other than include maybe a title about what they were talking about, or just a sentence about why they were there, that sort of thing.
Okay.
You also would have the approval of the agenda, assuming that you have an agenda in the minutes, and the approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Now, another thing that a lot of clerks kind of stumble with is including all the changes that were made to the minutes of the previous meeting, but you don't need to do that. You just need to record that they were approved as corrected, or that corrections were suggested and then it was approved, something like that. Because once those corrections are made, then that is the official minutes. The minutes as corrected are the official minutes. You don't have to have a record of exactly how they were changed, or whose name was misspelled, or what was slightly off, or anything like that. You just need to say as corrected, then correct them, and get them to the stated clerk, and those minutes become the official minutes. So you don't have to save all the previous versions of earlier minutes and draft minutes and things like that. Okay. More Robert's Rules guidelines. You generally want to include summaries of oral reports if you've only got an oral report. So if you've got staff there giving an oral report and they didn't bring a written report, you might summarize anything important that they had to say. If a chair is giving a report, again, you might want to record anything important. Same with subcommittees or commissions of your particular group. Don't summarize the remarks of a guest speaker, though. This is what I was talking about a second ago. Roberts doesn't want you to say, summarize the training that a guest would bring in. So if I were giving this presentation at your committee or a commission meeting, you wouldn't write down all the little bullets or something like that. You would just say, Dave Baker came and gave a presentation to X committee on writing minutes, period. And that would be that. You don't need to go into a great long summary of whatever it is a guest speaker is saying, because by Robert's principles and Robert's philosophy, it doesn't matter. Minutes are for recording actions, and that is not an action. It's just it's something that happened. So it's not something that really is of concern. That doesn't mean you can't take notes for yourself, or even separate notes, and send those out to the committee later, and say, look, this was this great training. This is what I got out of it. This is what I think you should get out of it, or could get out of it. But that doesn't go in the minutes. Another thing that is sort of a judgment call of the clerk is written reports. A lot of the time you might get a written report from a subcommittee or from a staff person, and if you have those, oftentimes the simplest and most complete thing that you can do is just to attach those to the minutes. So they would become part of the official record, and that way you don't have to summarize anything that they say. You can just say, report received as written, and then after your signature, the next page is that report. And it works out. That just goes in your official minute book. But that really depends on the relevancy of the report, and that depends a little bit on the judgment of the clerk as to, is it really relevant. For instance, a finance report that just kind of gives the monthly finance data, maybe that's not relevant. Maybe that's not really that interesting for for history or for official acts or things like that. Whereas the report of the chair, where the chair details all the effort they went to concerning some goal or directive of the committee or commission might be really relevant that you want to include. So that's sort of a gray area, but written reports can just be attached as part of the minutes, and then you're kind of done with them. There are a couple of things, or really just one major thing, that the Book of Order requests that we put in our minutes as well. And it doesn't actually talk about adding these to the minutes, but it is something that you should probably have in the minutes, because the Book of Order directs that each meeting of a council, and if you're a commission, that kind of counts, because you're acting on behalf of the Presbytery, that each meeting of a council would begin and end with prayer. So typically the minutes would reflect that, and you'd say, so and so began with prayer, or at 5:07 we began with devotional and prayer, something along those lines. And I know that that's the practice of most of our committees and commissions, at least everyone that I've ever been to. That's something that we do, and it's something that usually gets reflected in the minutes. Now, the best tip, these are some really good tips and tricks for writing good minutes. The best tip that I've ever gotten, that I've ever received for how to write good minutes came from the stated clerk of the Presbytery of the James. And he told me that the trick to writing good minutes is to write them ahead of time. Write them before the meeting. And it sounds kind of silly. It sounds kind of funny, like how can you actually do minutes before anything has happened? Well, the truth is it's not that hard, because usually you've got an agenda and you more or less know what's going to happen. I mean, there are very rarely huge surprises or turnarounds in routine business. And if there is, you can just change it later. But if you've written the minutes ahead of time, then take your laptop to the meeting, or maybe a printout of what you had written. It's much easier to just make small changes while you're there, rather than trying to type tons and tons of stuff out as it's going on, and you invariably miss something when that's the case. Also, you can be done with the minutes pretty much as soon as the meeting is over, or maybe even, as soon as someone says move to adjourn, you can just write in the time that it was adjourned, and you're done with the minutes. So it makes it a lot easier than trying to think back what happened 2 weeks ago, and from your memory try to remember, gosh, what did we vote on? Oh boy, who moved that? I don't know. So you've got a much easier job if you prepare and get all of your pens lined up prior to the meeting, and then just knock them down as you come to that item on the agenda, like X moves this and it was approved, this was the vote, that sort of thing. So that's the best tip that I can probably give you. Another good tip that is very intuitive is just to use sample minutes from somebody else. Use an example set of minutes as a base for your own minutes. So just get again, part of the role of minutes is to help the people who come after you. So whoever's coming after you, make sure that they get a set of your minutes that they can use as an example. And if you're coming in, then make sure that you get a set of minutes from the previous clerk to use as an example for whatever it is, for whatever committee it is that you're staffing. So I want to take a little bit of time to go through some sample committee minutes. Before I do, are there any questions about what Roberts has to say about writing good minutes? I'm going to take that stony silence as a no. Oh, we had a couple more people join us. Jerry Ann, can you hear us?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes, well, it's been wonderful so far.
Okay, excellent. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me anytime. I'm going to go ahead and move into our sample committee minutes. So this is kind of a compilation of all of the Roberts Rules guidelines that I just shared. So you can see right here, and I do want to say as well, while I follow a certain format of reports and then old business and then new business, or unfinished business, a lot of folks would say unfinished business rather than old business, your committee or commission might not hold to that at all. And you just want to follow whatever it is that your approved agenda says the order of business is. So just keep that in mind. But this is typically the way most meetings are structured according to Robert's rules. So the first thing you've got on there, of course, is the name of your commission, whatever it is, whatever's going on there, your council or your committee or your commission. The location, Sample Presbyterian Church, the name of the church in the city. The type of meeting, stated or special, so stated meeting minutes, and the date. You also want the time of the meeting in there, but that can come in a little bit later. Attendance, you've got those who are present, and I just filled in random names and ministers and elders, because typically we've got a mix of ministers and elders. And excused if folks had called in ahead and said they couldn't make it, and absent. That may not be a distinction that matters for most committees or commissions, so you can just have everybody be excused, or you can just have everybody be absent, but you should include present or there and not there, because it makes it easier to determine quorum and things like that, and it's a good practice. Also, you want to delineate guests, so folks who are guests, and you can just put after their name guest, or after their name ex officio, or whatever their status happens to be, to let the minutes show that they were there in that capacity. So here it's Charlie Smith from COM and David Baker, stated clerk, as the guests. So the Book of Order suggests that we open meetings with prayer, so that's recorded. Someone has opened the meeting with prayer at 10:31 a.m., so that's when you are showing the start time. The clerk declares a quorum, and again, if the moderator declared it, then fine, just put that the moderator declared it or that a quorum was declared. Even though that's the passive voice, and we all hate the passive voice, sometimes it's useful. The SC stands for stated clerk. I forgot to expand that there. Or no, that's the Sample Commission, SC. So the Sample Commission approved minutes from December 10th as corrected. So you've got the minutes being approved. Then you've got the agenda being approved in the minutes. Then you have reports. So we've got a report from the chair. Reverend Waters reported on tasks assigned during the previous meeting. And if there were a written report, you might want to see written report or see attachment or something like that, although you don't have to. The West Region report, I included that because a lot of our committees and commissions have got regional reports that they want to hear. And so usually the chair of the region would give a report of the actions of that commission to the main body. And so we got that for West, Central, East, because that's the practice of our presbytery. Then old or unfinished business. What I have here is an example of a motion. So someone moves that $1,000 be dispersed to some ministry from the commission's annual budget. The motion was seconded and passed. Now that's the kind of thing that the presbytery staff needs to have if you expect us to write a check. So in order for things to actually happen, there needs to be an official record of that action, of the intent of the committee, and this is that. So that's an action that the committee has or the commission has taken that would need to be shown to staff in order to get that implemented. additionally, that's something that would go into the report to the presbytery. It's an action that the committee takes, so it's something that needs to be reported, or rather the commission takes, so it has to be reported to the body from whom it derived that authority, which is the presbytery. So that's, just an example sort of motion there. New business, sample commission moves that Presbytery of Tampa Bay adopt a new policy, because that's something that it didn't have the authority to do, presumably, so it needs to petition the presbytery, and it's coming from the whole commission, not necessarily from an individual on the commission. And ideally, now this is sample, these are just kind of example minutes, so I didn't really include this, but ideally you'd want to have the full text of that policy in your minutes. If you're going to have a new policy or a motion to the presbytery, you want the full text of that motion in the minutes and in the report to the presbytery. I didn't include that, but because this is just an example, but whatever it is that you want the presbytery to do, you want to have that in your minutes and have it voted on by the committee, that sort of thing, so that it's easy to bring that directly to the presbytery. Okay, so here we've got an example of a guest speaker and how you should record the actions of a guest speaker, or whatever, the statements of a guest speaker. So State Clerk Dave Baker spoke to the commission at length, ad nauseum, regarding the very boring upcoming meeting of the presbytery. Notice it doesn't say that. Notice there's no commentary there, and it may be polite to say, the state clerk presented an excellent presentation or an edifying presentation on XYZ, but try to keep commentary to a minimum, and also summary to a minimum. There's no need to rehash whatever information it is that a speaker is presenting, because that's not germane to the actions of the committee. And again, you can feel free, and I encourage you to take minutes, or take notes, but not minutes. Take notes when a speaker comes to do some training or something, but you don't have to record it in the minutes. So you've also got here Elder 3 moved that the meeting be adjourned, which was seconded and passed. Sometimes that'll be in there and sometimes not. If you come to an appointed time to adjourn, in other words, if the meeting is has been scheduled to adjourn at 12:30, and if we finished our business or not, we're leaving at 12:30. That's okay for the chair just to say, bam, it's 12:30, we're adjourned. Or if you come to the end of the business of the agenda and the chair says, is there any more business? And nobody says anything, then the chair can just summarily say, okay, we're adjourned. And that's okay, but typically it is, there's a motion to adjourn, and then it's seconded and passed, then somebody prays, and you record the time, and then you're done. Now, typically what would happen then is, of course, you'd have a set of draft minutes, which, in my opinion, it's wise to share with the chair of the committee or commission, or the pastor if you happen to be a clerk of session or something like that. But you'd share that with the chair of the committee or commission, and just run it by them to see if you missed anything or see if they've got any suggestions. You don't have to do that. The minutes belong to you as the recording clerk, but typically it's smart, typically it's wise, and it does foster a sense of shared journey and whatnot. And you're going to, after that, usually send it out to the whole committee or the whole commission and get feedback from them about, maybe you misspelled somebody's name, or someone remembered it slightly differently, something along those lines. I like to do that immediately after the meeting, if possible. And if you brought your laptop to the meeting, it's much easier to do that. But then it's still fresh in everyone's head, and it's a little bit easier to get feedback like that. And of course, you would do the same thing right before the next meeting. Send it out with the agenda to everybody so that they've got it. so that they have something to look at and to approve at the next meeting of your committee or commission, so that you can have finalized minutes, official minutes, and make sure that you get those minutes to the stated clerk, so that I can, upload them to Google Drive, or just email them to me. So that does kind of bring us to our next section here on Google Drive. But before I get there, were there any other questions regarding the sample minutes here? Okay, so Google Drive. I'm assuming that we all know what Google Drive is. It's a computer program that allows you to share files, hopefully in a very easy manner, but it's essentially a way that we can have a shared Presbytery hard drive, and the stated clerk and the coach coordinator can both see all of the minutes and documents and agendas and things like that from our committees and commissions stretching back for years, but so can each committee and commission. So every committee and commission has its own folder, and the chair and the clerk of that committee or commission has access to edit and view those items, and typically the members of the committee would have permission to view. They could look at it if they wanted to, and that can be very useful. It can be extremely useful for doing historical research about what's happened in the past, for sharing and preserving records. In other words, it's very, very easy to make sure that things are officially in the Presbytery's care when you put them on that Google Drive folder. Then you're kind of done. And that's also a great way to preserve it, because then it's in the cloud, and then it's the stated clerk's problem, and I can worry about getting a hard copy of that somewhere. And if that's something that you don't know how to do, or if it's something that you don't have access to, just let me know and I will set it up, or I will send you a training video about how to get that onto your computer and how to use it in an effective way. Now, the other option is for you to email your minutes to the stated clerk so that I can upload them into that folder. So that's, if this just isn't for you and you're not technologically proficient at all, then just remember to always email me your minutes, and I can put them into the folder in a relatively quick manner. And then they, once again, are preserved, and whoever's coming after you will have a much, much easier time looking at all that stuff on Google Drive. Now, one of the great things about Google Drive, everyone on this webinar has used Google to search for something. Yes. Okay, good. I was a little scared for a minute there. All right, so we do know about Google, and you can use the same search technology that Google has for other, I assume it's the same anyway, the same search technology that Google has for the entire internet. It will apply towards your Google Drive. So let's say that you're looking for a particular action concerning a particular church that happened sometime in the last 2 years, but you don't remember when. It was sometime in the last 2 years, and it was a particular church, and you don't really remember when, but you need to find the minutes because of something going on right now. You can actually go to your Google Drive online, log into your Google account, and then click on that little rectangle and go to Google Drive, and then search your Google Drive folder for the church's name, and it will go through all of your minutes, even if they're PDFs. It'll go through all of your minutes and find all of the minutes that contain the name of that church, or if it's an individual, the name of that individual, and you can reduce the amount of time that you spent searching through your minutes from hours to seconds, and it's very, very handy for that. It's not foolproof. Sometimes, oh boy, that was First Presbyterian Church. There's only 1 million First Presbyterian churches in our minutes, or something like. So sometimes it takes a little creativity to get the answer you're looking for, but that is another tool that you can use when you've got a complete record of minutes on Google Drive. Okay, so any questions about Google Drive?
No, but this is Jerry Ann. I sure would like to get that link or whatever you have for us.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'll send that out to you, and that's for sessions in churches. You'd have to kind of set your own up, but it's super easy to do. It's not hard at all, and that's something that I'd be able to help you with, tomorrow or after this call. But I'll share those videos with you too.
Thank you.
Okay, so now the fun part. Yay! We're going to go through each individual commission and committee and talk about what specifically they need in their minutes. Now, I realize that we don't have representatives of every single committee and commission on this particular webinar, but I am planning to share this with those folks as a recording. So I do beg your forbearance as we go through committees and commissions that maybe you don't sit on. But do feel free to ask questions about any of this, and I will try to be efficient with everyone's time. Regional commissions. This is something that really the regional planning teams would be interested in, because they take minutes, and then of course the regional commissions of the Presbytery, East, Central, and West, take minutes. Now the regional commissions actually have almost no power given to them by our bylaws. They have exactly one thing that is kind of an official act that is delegated to them by the Presbytery, which is to examine and admit teaching elders to membership. So if someone is being ordained and they want to preach and then be examined, then that is something that the regional commission could do. It's also, there are other bodies that hold up power as well, but that's pretty much what the regional commissions have been delegated. There are a lot of other responsibilities that they have according to the bylaws. They are supposed to have worship, of course, and this is in between presbytery meetings. They would engage in worship, explore development of pastors and elders, develop support networks for pastors and elders, and those are kind of with hand in hand with the CCV, and also with the CCV create, quote, continuous learning communities, whatever it is that we decide that is, but that's the language of the bylaws, and a coaching network, and that's something that we haven't really gotten off the ground. To develop networks to enhance joint ministries. I think that is something that we have done more work on and tried to do, at least in the West region. And to welcome new commissioners and to receive reports. Regional commissions also have got different quorums. So the West Commission, now I'm going to share quorum information for each of our committees and commissions because as a minute taker, as a recording clerk, that is information that you're responsible to have. So I'm gonna do you a solid and I'm going to share it with you. So quorum for the West is 7 minister members and 7 commissioned elders from 7 different churches. Lots of 7s. Central is the same. East we lowered to 5 of each because there aren't nearly as many churches in the East. Trustees, generally speaking, the trustees are looking to record in their minutes any kind of official action. A lot of the times they need to have things in their minutes that are related to the legal corporation. or something for the record that is important, again, from a legal or a real estate law kind of standpoint. So things that they want to have in their minutes are approval of leases, because they're responsible to approve leases for churches that are longer than 5 years, or any lease of worship space. That needs to be approved by the trustees. It needs to be approved by the Presbytery, but that's been delegated to the trustees. They need to approve purchase or sale of real property for congregations. Approval of loans or grants, and for the presbytery itself, if the presbytery were buying property. Approval of loans and grants, again, for congregations or for the presbytery, although the presbytery would approve it and then they would implement it. Approval of sale of dissolved churches. Election of corporate officers. Approval of the report from the auditors. And any kind of motion that they're making to presbytery, make sure to have the full text of that motion in the minutes. And just a record of the investments that they're managing and what actions they've taken regarding those investments. That's something that they've been entrusted with. When they're actually selling property or having some sort of loan on a property or lease on a property, it's important to include in the minutes, and this is true for any committee or commission, but for the presbytery, it's going to be the trustees primarily that are dealing with this. They want to include the name, address, and legal description of the property, which is that, kind of funny Plat 5, Book 9 sort of language that you see on titles and deeds sometimes. The name of the person buying or leasing, the sale price and terms, the amount of the loan if it's a loan, including the name of the lender, lease terms and liability insurance information. The quorum of the trustees is very simple. It's 5 members, and that's set in our corporate bylaws. Commission on ministry. Now there are several, there's at least one from the COM on the call. So this one is by far the longest one, because a great number of routine business has been delegated to the Commission on Ministry from the Presbytery. But generally speaking, any kind of official action or anything that's been delegated to the COM from the bylaws needs to be recorded. So any sort of policies, and there are a lot of policies required by the Book of Order and delegated in the bylaws, like equal opportunity, minimum terms of call, policies on training of new COM members, receiving regional COM reports. When those have happened, those need to go in the minutes. And the quorum for the COM is the majority of its members. Most commissions are just a simple majority. The majority of people who show up, or the majority of the members, is what you need for the quorum. So if there are 10 people on the commission, then the quorum is 5. If there are 9 people on the commission, then the quorum is still 5, unless you have a half person. So the math humor, no one likes math humor. That's okay. Okay, so regional COMs, generally speaking, again, any kind of action. Now, a transfer in, so you're examining someone when they come into the presbytery, that needs to be recorded that it was approved or not. Approval when someone transfers out. When someone leaves, they don't just disappear. We have to approve their transfer. We have to prove that they're going, and I can't complete that process until it ends up in the minutes. And that's something actually we'll talk about at the next COM meeting. F1 agreements between churches and pastors. That's just the financial contract between the pastor with the minimum terms of call and that sort of thing. Installation commissions for installed pastors, and or when you're ordaining a pastor, that also goes on the F2. Dissolution of call reports. I feel like I haven't seen as many of those, but those are also items that would be received in the minutes and make it hopefully to the stated clerk's desk. dates of training and events that the regional COMs might be holding for the greater Presbytery or for themselves. For instance, the thing that we did with Ray Jones recently. Reports of liaisons, to churches or about churches. And again, you might not want to summarize the whole thing, or if you receive a written report, it might be confidential and just go in a file rather than being attached to the minutes, or it might just be attached. Validation of ministries for teaching elders, or I guess we're no longer teaching elders in about 2 months, but validation of ministries for ministers, also for commissioned ruling elders and certified Christian educators. Changes to our pulpit supply list. By our bylaws, that's something that the regional COMs do. Appointing session moderators. Now a session moderator that is a pastor an installed pastor can just ask someone else to moderate. That's within their ability. But if a church doesn't have a installed pastor, then the COM can appoint a moderator. Approve mission information forms. The full text of motions to Presbytery, if they've got any. Sabbatical leave requests, according to our bylaws, are approved by the COM. That's really part of terms of call, though. Approve minister members to honorably retired status. And that's actually been one that's had some controversy to it, because that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no celebration of their honorably retired status, but that means that the actual decision is made at the regional COM level, but then it would be celebrated at a regional meeting, like the regional commission meetings, which are sort of like the mini presbytery meetings, or at the presbytery, depending on the wishes of the minister member. Recommend relief of vacancy dues for the Board of Pensions. Approve ministers not serving in church to officiate sacraments. When you are in a validated ministry, typically you are supposed to ask for permission to perform a baptism or to officiate at the Lord's Supper. Now, typically we have a policy for those serving in chaplaincy that they just kind of use their best judgment. But technically speaking, those are supposed to be approved by a board. For a pastoral minister, it would be approved by their session, or for, say, a minister coming in just to preach on a Sunday and perform communion, that again would be approved by the session. But if someone is not attached to the authority of a session, usually it would be approved by the COM. To examine and authorize commissioned ruling elders to a particular service. So the CPM sort of trains the CREs and gets them ready, and then the COM actually says, yes, you're called to this particular church. The quorum for regional COMs, again, is just the majority of members, and that's typically what it is for a commission, is just the majority of members. And any questions about COM?
Nope.
I knew you had this down, but thought I would ask. Commission on preparation. Again, generally speaking, any kind of official action or record is what you want in those minutes. So approving any kind of status change for someone, taking them under care as an inquirer, moving them from inquirer to candidate, certifying them ready to receive a call, all of that sort of stuff definitely needs to go in the minutes. Any forms, the official forms, I think it's 1 through 6 or 1 through 7, that need action, those need to be recorded. Approval of funding or scholarships. Again, Joe cannot write a check until he sees the minutes. So we need to have those minutes if we're going to implement the decisions of the committee or commission. The nomination to Presbytery of exam readers for the ordination exams. Reports of liaisons on inquirers and candidates. And that can be, that can be a little, or that can be a lot, or that can be attached, or it can just be noted. But typically that is something that the CPM, that's a portion of the CPM's business that is relevant and often worthy of inclusion. Full text of motions to the presbytery. You may have detected a theme, but that's something that we need. Examination of commissioned ruling elders as to their readiness to receive a call, and obviously all the steps kind of in between there would go into the minutes as well. Approve transfer of candidates and inquirers to other presbyteries. That's uncommon, but it does happen, and that is the purview of the CPM, not the COM, to transfer a candidate or an inquirer. And again, the quorum for the CPM is the majority of members. Commission on Church Vitality. If you have any questions here, Paula, of course, feel free to stop me. Generally speaking, again, whatever you're doing that is an official action needs to go in the minutes. So if, for instance, there is a grant that needs to be signed off on by the CCV, then that action would be recorded. If it's a seed grant or a growth grant or investment grant or whatever they're calling them nowadays, that would go in the minutes as being approved or not. Approval of other grant requests, and this is again just disbursement of funds from your budget or from special funds from the trustees. You would again include those in your minutes. Reports from new church developments. Technically, the regional COMs are the sessions of a new church development. We used to have several new church developments in the presbytery. We don't have too many right now, but in the past that was a large part of the work of the former Evangelism and Church Development Committee. And when or if our regional CCVs take on that work again, because we have funds for it now, then they would also be receiving regular reports, either monthly or quarterly, from the new church development pastors, the new church development steering committees, as to attendance, funds, ministries, initiatives, things like that, in order to kind of help keep them on track and act as their session from a distance, but still act as kind of their authority. Any kind of events or training that they are planning for the presbytery, it's a great thing to include in the minutes. Again, full text of motions to presbytery and receiving the regional reports. And again, the quorum is a simple majority for the CCV. Okay. Paula, did you have any comments there?
Nope, looks good.
Okay, excellent. Nomination and representation is one of the few here that is actually not a commission. This is a committee. So the difference between a committee and a commission is a committee doesn't have any actual authority to do things. It can only make recommendations to a higher authority, whereas a commission is commissioned with a certain amount of power. It has delegated power from the presbytery to actually get things done. So the Nomination and Representation Committee, its minutes need to be especially precise because they are they're trying to get things they're trying to get actions taken by the presbytery. So there's a high level of detail in what they're reporting. So they're typically going to need the name, the region, because we try to balance people from various regions to, when they're nominating to fill vacancies on committees and commissions. Whether or not that person is a minister member or a ruling elder. The term that they are of the person, is it their first term, their second term, are they filling a partial term, that sort of thing. The class, that is the year that their service will be over, class of 2019 or whatever. The records that representation details have been taken into account, so it needs to be in the minutes for nomination and representation that they've done the job of the representation committee to make sure that the voices of those who are not in the majority are well represented, and that those details have been considered. It's not always possible to have full representation on every single committee or commission, but that has been attempted, and that's been addressed and thought about and tried. Also, the processes for nominations for General Assembly and Synod, so whatever sort of policies or processes that they come up with for nominating our commissioners to hire councils need to be in their minutes as well. An investigating committee is something that really, hopefully none of you ever will need to know anything more about, but it's part of the rules of discipline, and it's something that that is appointed by the stated clerk in consultation with the moderator and the chair of the coordinating team. But essentially what that is concerning is the judicial process and whether or not somebody did something they shouldn't have done. So for that committee, generally speaking, they're recording actions but also interviews and evidence that they come across. So they want in their minutes, if there would have been a formal allegation, that needs to go in their minutes or attached to their minutes. The people that they've interviewed, they may not necessarily need to have like a transcript of the interview, but a summary is probably appropriate, as well as the time, date, and place that the interview took, where that took place. Records of the evidence gathered, so where did they get it? What is the evidence? What's the value? Those sorts of things. And recommendations to the Permanent Judicial Commission, which would either be to file charges or not to file charges, or to have an alternative form of resolution instead of some kind of charges. In other words, sort of a settlement. So again, hopefully no one ever needs to know that information, but I wanted to record it for posterity. The Permanent Judicial Commission, generally speaking, if you are taking notes or minutes for the PJC, you're going to want to record actions, and if there's a trial, actual testimony. And it's often a best case or best practice to just record the trial, and we can get it transcribed at some point as well. But short of the trial, typically you want to be recording any actions related to the judicial process, and it's okay to include details and whatnot, because typically these records are kept kind of under lock and key, and they're not, they're highly confidential usually. Detailed records of testimony, and that may in fact include a full transcript of whatever has gone on at a trial. The full text of any ruling, including the voting tally, and most of the time decisions of PJCs need a 2/3 majority in order to be implemented. That is censure, if it's imposed, in other words, punishment or rebuke, or hopefully restorative, grace-filled rules kind of laid down in order to bring someone back into full communion and full service. And the text of the report to the Presbytery regarding the actions that it's taken. So the quorum for a PJC is a majority, unless some people needed to recuse themselves because they had to address a urgent situation where they needed to see if someone should be put on paid administrative leave or not. Okay, so administrative commissions, and generally speaking, there are 3 different kinds of administrative commission. There are commissions to dissolve a church, assume original jurisdiction, and to dismiss a church. And there can be a ton of different kinds of administrative commissions. They're not limited to that, but typically speaking, that those are the most common causes to form an administrative commission. And generally speaking, commissions only have the power that they're given by the presbytery. They can't do anything the presbytery didn't tell them that they could do, essentially. And they need to report every single thing that they do to the presbytery at its next meeting if they, take actions. So the generally speaking actions that they need to record if they're dissolving a church would be, what do they do with the property? What did they give it all away? Did they sell it? Is the church property itself, that is the real property, not just the pews and the Bibles and that kind of thing, is the real property being sold or being used by another ministry, or what's going on with it? Things that they need to purchase or buy or use from the existing funds and checking accounts of the church, recommendations to the trustees regarding the sale of the property, and to the presbytery regarding the dissolution of the administrative commission. And to a certain degree, that also depends on the powers that the AC is given when it's formed, but typically it's given the power to make kind of a lot of those decisions on its own without further input from the presbytery. The other kind of administrative commission is sort of the unfun kind, which is assuming original jurisdiction. What that means is an administrative commission can sometimes be empowered by the presbytery to take over for a session in a particularly trying or difficult time, where it's perceived or decided that the church needs to have that outside authority to help and solve a problem. So if it's assuming original jurisdiction, they need to record any kind of action that they are taking with the authority of the session, because they in effect become the session of that congregation. So anything that they do with that authority, they need to write down. That includes funds, and it also, of course, includes when they make a recommendation to presbytery that they remember to dissolve themselves or ask the presbytery to dissolve them. For dismissing a congregation, there's actually a ton more on this and a huge amount of guidance that we have for this, but typically and basically they need to record meetings that they have with the Sessions Administrative Commission, the survey of the congregation, showing if how many people want to leave, records showing that all sides have been heard, appraisal of the property, and a final recommendation. And of course all of this is related to our gracious dismissal policy. Okay, so this part is relevant to everybody, and that is reports to the presbytery. So if you're a commission, it's required that you have a report to the presbytery. If you're a committee, you probably can't get anything done without a report to the presbytery. So this is something that we need to have done every for every committee and every commission every time there is a stated presbytery meeting. Typically, our presbytery only has 2 stated meetings a year, and typically the due date for the report is going to be 10 days before the actual presbytery meeting, because that only leaves me 3 days to get the presbytery packet out a week before the actual meeting. So everybody who's taking minutes for a committee or commission needs to do a report to the presbytery. So this is what that report would contain. It's not just a copy of your minutes. It's a summary of everything that you've done probably in the last 6 months. And the whole presbytery doesn't want to read, every single, they don't want to read all your minutes from the last 6 months. They want a summary, because the packet's already 100 pages long. So you want to include all motions to the presbytery, and anything that is not directly a part of your delegated authority found in the bylaws of the presbytery is something that you probably need a motion to the presbytery for. You can always ask the stated clerk or the coach coordinator if you're not sure if something needs a motion or not. You also want to include all actions that you've taken, especially as a commission, in your report. So any kind of status change for a minister member, or distribution of funds, or decision that you came to. So any kind of action needs to be included in the report. And also any kind of item of information that you think is relevant. And that's also your kind of excuse to advertise something that you want to advertise for your committee or commission. If it's an event coming up, or something that y'all are planning or thinking about or decided you want the presbytery's help with, just individual churches or individuals within the presbytery, that's sort of a space to let the presbytery know about fun stuff that you're up to, that may be coming down the road. So I do want to go through a sample written report to the presbytery, and this is the last thing that we're going to do, by the way. So if you have general questions or whatnot, we're almost to the end. But it typically is broken out into motions, actions, and items of information. And you would ideally want to put the motions kind of towards the top. Of course, tell us what your committee is or your commission. Also, give us the date of the presbytery meeting. This is for the Presbytery of Tampa Bay. This is the meeting, the stated meeting that we're reporting to. And then these are the motions. Now, of course, you would want to attach to your report any sort of supporting documents for the motion. Like if your motion is approve X policy, then the policy might be the next page of your report, something like that. And you can just send me the policy and I'll worry about making sure that it's the next page. But the example one here that was actually come up, these were all Jerry Tyer's humor. He was the previous executive here, and he'd come up with this document, and I liked it, so I blatantly borrowed it. That kennel service be provided at every meeting of the presbytery. So that's a motion for the presbytery. The presbytery would decide on. The date after that is optional, but it's sometimes handy to have, and the date would be indicating the date of the committee meeting where that motion was determined. So that's kind of coming from the minutes from the meeting of January 1st, 2017, for that that particular motion from that particular committee. But that's not really necessary to have. In many cases, it's very helpful, particularly for COM, but for a lot of committees and commissions, it may not matter. Actions taken. Again, these should be pretty easy to gather because they're already in your minutes. It's just copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. Read all of your minutes and just go through and copy, paste the relevant portions into the various sections of the report. And I have this I have this document if anyone needs it, this template that they can use for their report. But any kind of action that is of a delegated nature to your commission or committee, you would record there. And items of information, again, that's just anything that you feel that it's important for the presbytery to know. Any kind of training coming up, or exciting stuff that you're working on, or good news you want to share, or cool stuff that's happened, or whatever it is that you feel the need to share. And of course, within those reports, if there are any supporting documents or any supporting materials, those would go to the stated clerk as well, and I just include them in the packet. So we actually did that 45 minutes faster than I did in person. So good job, guys. Wow. Are there any questions that y'all have got?
I had one question on the report to the stated presbytery meeting.
Okay.
So on your motion number 1, that the kennel service be provided at every meeting of the presbytery, do we only have it up there, or do we also have it under our actions taken, where the action taken was to recommend the kennel service be provided, that the presbytery approve kennel service at every presbytery meeting?
Good question. Yeah, you would just it's redundant to have it twice, so it's just a motion to the presbytery, because while it was an action, technically that was taken because in the meeting, you're going to say, so and so moved to recommend to the Presbytery, blah blah blah. But it's not an actual action taken as a commission. So that's not a delegated action that has been given to you by the Presbytery that you're reporting, hey, on the Presbytery's behalf, we went out and did X. Or we approved this particular person to this particular service. So yeah, it just goes under motions.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so if there are no other questions or answers, I do want to first off say thanks for being here. And is there anything that we could do? Are there any topics, or is there anything that we could do to help you further in your role as either a committee chair or a committee minute taker or a clerk of session, or whatever role it is you've got? What could we do to better equip you, or what did you wish you saw in this training that wasn't there? That kind of thing.
I thought it was very thorough. This is Jerry Ann. You know, being new to this, Presbytery and being clerk of session for the first time, everything you've done so far, Pastor Dave, has been spot on for me, and I really appreciate all that you do for us. I think you're an exceptional teacher.
Well, thank you. That's I am sort of aiming at the new folks, and I hope that if anyone is watching this subsequently and is new and has questions, that they'll contact me. Just email me, at statedclerk@pbty.com, and ask me if you've got a question about any of this or about anything in general. But other comments or other areas that we might improve or that we might cover in the future?
Now, I think one thing that you said there, the big tip about having the minutes done before the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Once I started doing that, that made it so easy. We have a COM meeting on Thursday, and my minutes are already done.
Yep. Yep. It was a game changer. It was incredible. And the other great thing about that is that you can still be a productive member of the committee if you do that. You'll have time to talk and contribute if you are not spending all of your energy trying to frantically copy things down or remember the exact phrasing or this or that. So yeah, I think it's a game changer. So thanks for reiterating that. Okay, if there aren't any other comments or questions, again, thank you all so much for all of the service that you're giving to the Presbytery.